Picture this. Fluorescent lights flicker in a quiet ward, the smell of antiseptic hangs in the air, and a white coat moves silently from bed to bed. The symbol of trust, the person we turn to when everything else falls apart. Now imagine that same white coat is hiding a predator. When a doctor kills, the betrayal hits different. The tools of healing become instruments of harm. The knowledge that saves lives becomes a weapon. And in a handful of chilling cases in the United States, that weapon has led straight to a life behind bars. Today, we're stepping into the darkest corners of medicine to examine doctors convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. This is not myth, not rumor. These are court-tested cases with judges, juries, and reams of medical records. We'll look at how they got away with it for as long as they did, the red flags people missed, and the systemic breakdowns that let the unthinkable happen. We'll cover Michael Swango, the doctor turned serial poisoner whose trail stretches from American ICUs to clinics overseas. Kermit Gosnell, the Philadelphia physician whose clinic became infamous as a house of horrors. MacDonald, the Army doctor convicted of killing his wife and daughters in a case that still sparks debate. Hsiu Ying, Tseng, whose prescriptions were so reckless a jury found them murderous. And a closely related case, psychiatrist Narendra Nagareddy, indicted on murder counts tied to overdose deaths. He did not receive a life sentence, but his case reveals how close the line can be between a prescription and a fatality. Along the way, you'll hear about medical tools and meds, everything from EHR platforms to drug names that changed the opioid era, because the details matter. We'll talk about the health tech that could have helped, the AI that's now flagging outlier prescribers, and the day-to-day hardware in hospitals, from infusion pumps to pulse oximeters, that can save a life or mask a crime. Discretion advised. We'll discuss violence, medical detail, and patient deaths. These stories are about accountability, not sensationalism. And one quick creative ask, right now while your attention is at clinical levels. If true crime and medical mysteries are your thing, scrub in with us. Tap that subscribe button like you're sanitizing before surgery. Quick, deliberate, no hesitation. And hit the bell so you're paged when the next case goes live. Subscribing is a simple preventive care step that keeps this series alive. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Poisoner in the White Coat, Michael Swango. Before he was a doctor, he was a paramedic. Before he was a household name in true crime, he was a quiet presence in hospital corridors. Michael Swango's story reads like a medical thriller you'd dismiss as too implausible, except every chapter is documented, signed, and sealed in court records. Born in the mid-1950s, Swango moved through the medical pipeline at a time when background checks were less rigorous. EHRs didn't talk to each other, and hiring sometimes depended on paper resumes and phone calls that never got returned. He graduated, donned the white coat, and stepped into ICUs where the slightest changes, an IV flush, an injection, a tainted beverage, could make the difference between a patient's recovery and a mystery code blue. Colleagues noticed odd things. Patients who seemed stable taking sudden turns. Nurses who tasted something bitter in drinks he brought. Coworkers getting violently ill after a snack. Poison, suspicion, denials, then another hospital, another chance. In the 1980s, amid mounting alarm, Swango was convicted not of murder, but of aggravated battery in connection with poisoning his coworkers. He served time, then reinvented himself. Different hospitals, new references, old patterns. Without integrated digital credential systems or robust data sharing across states, no standardized API to pull from a single source of truth, some institutions missed the warning signs. In an analog world, he found the gaps. Let's talk about the mechanics of suspicion. In hospitals, vital signs stream across monitors: oxygen saturation, heart rate, blood pressure. If you've ever checked your Fitbit, Garmin, or Apple Watch, you know the rhythm. When a patient's numbers change suddenly, clinicians are trained to think medication error, pulmonary embolism, septic shock. But poisoning, that's not the first thought. Back then, AI surveillance for anomalies didn't exist. No machine learning models scanning chart patterns across Epic or Cerner EHRs. No predictive analytics comparing mortality rates between shifts. If such tools had been standard, Swango's units might have lit up like a warning dashboard on Splunk or Datadog. Spikes in codes near specific personnel, unusual medication overrides, narcotics cabinet access logs that didn't match typical patterns. Today, AI-driven platforms can flag outlier prescribers or clinicians in seconds. Then, you were lucky if pharmacy logs were current by end of week. Investigators later concluded that Swango likely used classic poisons, think toxic metals or cyanide compounds, rather than prescribing errors with oxycodone, hydromorphone, or benzodiazepines like alprazolam. He didn't need opioid mills or forged scripts. He needed access, plausible deniability, and a setting where death is not uncommon. Hospitals like ICUs can mask foul play because dying happens there, even under the best care and the best equipment: ventilators, infusion pumps, central lines, and pharmacy-dispensed meds. Swango didn't stop in the U.S. His trail reached overseas. That cross-border movement would be harder today, with international databases, credentialing verification services, and platforms like LexisNexis or WorldCheck assisting HR. Back then, it took a mix of whistleblowers, newspaper reporting, and finally federal interest to bring the picture into focus. By the late 1990s, investigators had enough to move in on his pattern: deaths around his presence, deception in his applications, and toxicology results that lined up in disturbing ways. Toxicology labs, using gas chromatography mass spectrometry, high-performance liquid chromatography, and immunoassays, translated invisible compounds into data points that could stand up in court. In the year 2000, in federal court, Swango pled guilty to murdering multiple patients and to fraud-related charges connected to his medical employment. He received life sentences without the possibility of parole. That sentence didn't just close a case, it forced a reckoning in healthcare. How did he keep getting hired? Why didn't HR spot the red flags? The aftermath helped spur reforms: better credentialing, centralized background checks, stiffer verification of references, and more robust adverse event reporting. Hospital risk departments invested in tools, SIEM systems, audit logging, EHR access triggers that could surface unusual patterns. Some institutions began piloting AI that scans for repeated code events associated with certain staff schedules, software not unlike what credit card companies use to flag fraud. In a world of APIs and interoperable health data, it's harder for a predator to hide. Swango's case also became a cautionary tale in medical education. It's one thing to teach pharmacology, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, antibiotics like vancomycin or piperacillin tazobactam. It's another to teach vigilance. Watch the pattern, follow the data, trust your instincts. If a nurse says, every time he's on, patients crash, you don't brush it off. That's why anonymous reporting tools exist now, integrated into platforms from HR suites like Workday to whistleblower hotlines. Even tech you wouldn't associate with medicine, Slack, Notion, Zoom, have become part of hospital workflows with audit trails that can corroborate timelines. What was Swango like? Accounts describe a controlled, careful operator, someone who curated his image. He kept notebooks. He lied convincingly. He didn't need high-tech gadgets. He weaponized trust. He is serving life in prison, and the people who knew him still replay the could-haves and should-haves. If a single earlier report had traveled faster, if a single credential check had been more rigorous, if the technology we have now had existed then.
Up next, a very different kind of doctor, a very different kind of crime scene, but the same result: a life sentence. Chapter 2: The House of Horrors. Kermit Gosnell. Not all medical crimes hide behind clean charts and quiet doses. Some happen in plain view, in clinics where the violations are so visible you can smell them before you see them. Kermit Gosnell's Philadelphia clinic was one of those places. What investigators found there in 2010 shocked even seasoned law enforcement. Let's set the context. Gosnell was a physician performing abortions in a clinic that by multiple independent accounts failed basic standards of care. Untrained staff, expired meds, filthy instruments, fetal remains stored in jars and refrigerators, and sedation practices that would make any anesthesiologist drop their cup of coffee. This wasn't a single error, it was a system of neglect and cruelty. The raid wasn't prompted by abortion politics. It began as a drug investigation into suspected illegal distribution of controlled substances. Think prescription pads, opioids like oxycodone, and benzodiazepines such as Xanax given out like candy. Pill mill behavior. But when authorities entered, they walked into something far worse. The grand jury report described the clinic as a house of horrors. Prosecutors argued that Gosnell delivered babies alive during illegal late-term abortions, then killed them. He was also charged in the death of a patient, Karmanya Mangar, who died of a drug overdose and poor monitoring under his watch. In 2013, after a highly publicized trial, Gosnell was convicted of multiple counts, including 3 first-degree murders of infants born alive and the involuntary manslaughter of Karmanya Mangar. He received life sentences without the possibility of parole after waiving his right to appeal. He'll spend the rest of his life in a Pennsylvania state prison. Let's pause on the medicine because details matter. Sedation and analgesia can be safe when administered by trained staff with proper dosing, monitoring, and resuscitation equipment. You assess airways, titrate doses, and track vital signs with monitors, EKG leads, pulse oximetry, capnography, and you keep reversal agents on hand, like naloxone for opioid overdose and flumazenil for benzodiazepines. You follow protocols, you maintain sterile technique, you document everything in an EHR. You calibrate your infusion pumps, you do peer review. That didn't happen here. The clinic used outdated, unsafe practices. Staff lacked proper training. Oxygen tanks were empty. Equipment wasn't sterile. Patient safety isn't optional. It's the whole point of healthcare. When you cut every corner, when you use the wrong meds, fail to monitor respiration, and ignore hemorrhage, you're gambling with human lives. Yes, powerful pain meds exist for a reason. Fentanyl patches, hydromorphone, even propofol in operating rooms, but they come with protocols so strict that one misstep can be fatal. That's why sedation checklists exist. That's why anesthetists train for years. If you're ever in a procedure suite, you want to see organized trays, labeled syringes, clean suction, a code cart with defibrillator pads, and staff who know where everything is, like a flight crew doing a safety check before takeoff. What about oversight? Gosnell's case revealed stark gaps. Regulatory agencies missed opportunities to intervene earlier, despite prior complaints and emergency room referrals for complications. In the aftermath, states revisited inspection standards and reporting mechanisms. This is where modern tools, digital incident reporting, centralized licensing databases, and even AI-driven risk scoring can change the game. Platforms used by health departments now can cross-reference clinic metrics, adverse event reports, and prescription data from PDMPs, prescription drug monitoring programs, to flag unusual patterns. If you've ever heard of PDMPs, they're like the bank statements of controlled substances. They track prescriptions of opioids, stimulants, and sedatives across pharmacies, names like oxycodone, morphine, amphetamines used for ADHD, and alprazolam for anxiety. PDMPs don't criminalize legitimate prescribing, they visualize it. Think dashboards, audit logs, and alerts. Google Cloud, AWS, and Azure host secure data pipelines. Analytics tools like Tableau visualize trends. And yes, AI can highlight statistical outliers so a human can investigate. Gosnell's case also became a flashpoint in public discourse about reproductive rights, regulation, and access. One side argued for stricter clinic standards to prevent bad actors. Another warned that excessive regulation can reduce access, pushing patients toward unlicensed providers and dangerous situations. Both concerns can be true simultaneously. What's not in dispute is the verdict. A jury weighed the evidence and found him guilty of murder. The life sentences reflect the gravity of what happened inside that clinic. Let's talk about why this story resonates beyond true crime. It's the clash between trust and betrayal, between the idea of a doctor as a healer and the reality of a doctor who treats a clinic like a profit engine, using sedation as a shortcut, not a tool. Patients aren't lab numbers. They are people with families, histories, and futures. The devices you see, blood pressure cuffs, EKG monitors, pulse oximeters, are there to protect them. The meds, lidocaine, antibiotics, analgesics, are there to help them. The credentialing, the continuing education on platforms like UpToDate, NEJM Knowledge Plus, and CME modules are there so providers stay sharp. When a doctor ignores all that, the consequences are fatal. Gosnell is now serving life without parole. His clinic is closed, and every time a health department runs an unannounced inspection with a checklist on a tablet, every time a PDMP flags a prescribing spike, every time a clinic upgrades to sterile single-use equipment with traceable barcodes, it's one more layer meant to stop the next house of horrors before it starts. A quick pulse check. If you're still with me, you're exactly the kind of viewer we love making videos for. Curious, detail-oriented, and unwilling to look away from hard truths. Do me a favor, tap subscribe.
We're only getting started. The next case is a decades-long saga, an army doctor whose name divides court watchers like few others. Chapter 3. The Paradox of Proof. Jeffrey MacDonald. Fort Bragg, 1970. A physician, a Green Beret, and a husband, Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald, calls for help in the early hours. His wife and two small daughters are found brutally murdered in their home. He is injured, claiming a home invasion by intruders, a man with a club, others with knives and an ice pick, and a woman in a floppy hat chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." If that sounds eerily reminiscent of the Manson murders that had gripped the nation only months before, investigators thought so too. The question that shadowed this case for decades wasn't just who could do such a thing, but how to separate narrative from evidence, how to weigh forensic traces in a pre-DNA era and then reweigh them as science evolved. Let's set the stage carefully, because true crime fans know this case is a labyrinth. Shortly after the murders, an Army Article 32 hearing, an investigative process, examined the evidence. Charges were initially dismissed within the military system, but years later the case resurfaced in federal court. In 1979, after a hard-fought trial in North Carolina, a civilian jury convicted MacDonald of murdering his wife, Colette, and their daughters, Kimberly and Kristen. He received multiple life sentences. Since then, he has maintained his innocence, and the case has spiraled through appeals, affidavits, new forensic tests, and a storm of public debate. He remains incarcerated, serving those life sentences. Let's talk about the evidence. In 1970, investigators didn't have the benefit of modern DNA analytics. They worked with blood typing, fibers, fingerprints, and pattern analysis. Here's something unusual. Each member of the MacDonald family had a different blood type, which allowed investigators to create a kind of movement map, like a primitive data visualization of who bled where and when. That mapping, combined with the distribution of fibers from MacDonald's torn pajama top and the location of weapons, created a narrative, at least for prosecutors, that the scene had been staged. It's one thing to tell a story, it's another to prove it. Jurors heard from experts on blood spatter and fiber transfer. They heard about the ice pick, the club, the knife. They compared the defendant's injuries, serious but survivable, with the catastrophic injuries inflicted on his family. The prosecution argued the disparity mattered. Decades later, DNA testing entered the picture. When labs talk about DNA, they don't just mean a single test, they mean a battery of methods. STR analysis, mitochondrial DNA, and more. They mean chain of custody logs that would look at home inside a logistics platform like SAP or Oracle, except here, what's moving is evidence sealed in bags, signed over, and logged at every step.
In the 2000s, new DNA testing was performed on hairs and other trace materials. The results? They did not exonerate MacDonald. Some findings were either inconclusive or consistent with known sources in the apartment. Courts weighed those results against the trial record and did not find a compelling basis for a new trial. The legal odyssey is long, too long to detail every filing, but here are pillars to understand. Witnesses. Over the years, people associated with a potential floppy hat suspect surfaced and recanted or contradicted themselves. Memory is a tricky instrument, more like a temperamental EKG than a stable metric on a Garmin. Courts tend to prefer contemporaneous physical evidence over late-arriving recollections. Forensics then versus now. Blood typing was state-of-the-art in 1970. Today, labs run samples through high-sensitivity instruments, GCMS, LCMS, and DNA sequencers made by companies like Thermo Fisher, Illumina, and Agilent. But not every old sample can yield a clear profile. Time, contamination, and degradation matter. Appeals standard. Federal appellate courts don't retry cases. They test for legal error, constitutional flaws, or truly new evidence with the power to likely change the verdict. MacDonald's appeals and motions have been considered repeatedly. Courts have consistently upheld the convictions. If you've read Joe McGinnis's book, Fatal Vision, or watched documentaries that present competing narratives, you know this case still stirs strong opinions. In the courtroom, however, opinions don't carry the day. Evidence does. The ruling remains. Guilty. Life sentences stand. Let's zoom out to the medical angle. It's uncomfortable to remember that MacDonald was a doctor, an emergency physician. We expect ER doctors to be calm under pressure, skilled with tools like laryngoscopes, defibrillators, and central line kits, fluent in meds from epinephrine to ketamine. We expect them to keep you alive in a trauma bay. That's the paradox here, a healer found guilty of the very act he's trained to confront in others. Technology changes how we ask questions in old cases. If a comparable crime happened today, you'd see a different evidence pipeline. Digital forensics pulling data from smartphones, wearables like Apple Watch or Oura Ring showing heart rate spikes and sleep patterns, smart home devices logging motion, EHR entries with med timestamps, and even geo-fenced app pings from platforms like Life360 or Google Maps. In labs, analysts would run touch DNA on weapon handles, recover latent prints with cyanocrylate fuming, and search results through CODIS. AI-assisted tools, think computer vision models, could help triage thousands of photos from the scene, flagging areas of interest. None of that existed in 1970. Still, the core question doesn't change. Can the government carry the burden of proof? In this case, jurors and judges determined the answer was yes. Before we leave this case, a reminder, disagreement among the public is not rare in famous trials. But as a matter of record, Jeffrey MacDonald is serving his life sentences in federal custody. The procedural aftershocks, the petitions, the rulings, the new tests have not altered that.
Chapter 4. The Prescriptions That Killed. Hsiu Ying, Lisa, Tseng. The exam room looks ordinary. White walls, a rolling stool, laminated pain scales from 0 to 10. But what happened in a clinic in Rowland Heights, California, was anything but ordinary. Hsiu Ying, Lisa Tseng, a physician, wrote prescriptions so reckless that a Los Angeles County jury in 2015 found her guilty of second-degree murder for 3 patient overdose deaths. In 2016, she was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. This case is a landmark for a reason. It didn't hinge on a doctor injecting poison in the shadows or operating in a visibly unsafe space. It hinged on prescription pads, electronic prescribing systems, and the standard of practice that separates pain management from lethal neglect. Let's break it down, because in the opioid era, details are life and death. The medications. Patients at Tseng's clinic received high-dose opioids, oxycodone, including OxyContin and roxicodone, hydrocodone, Vicodin, Norco, oxymorphone, Opana ER, methadone, often alongside benzodiazepines such as alprazolam, Xanax, or diazepam, Valium, and at times muscle relaxants like carisoprodol, Soma. That trio, opioid, benzo, carisoprodol, has a grim nickname among toxicologists, the Holy Trinity, a respiratory depression time bomb. The red flags. Prosecutors showed a pattern: young patients with minimal diagnostic workup walking out with large, overlapping prescriptions, instances where patients or pharmacies warned about overdoses, charting that didn't match the gravity of risks, and a pace of prescribing out of proportion to normal practice. The tools that existed. California's PDMP, called Cures, was available to check patient prescription histories. Urine drug screens run by labs like Quest Diagnostics or LabCorp could assess adherence and diversion risk. Opioid risk tools, signed treatment agreements, and dose ceilings measured in MME, morphine milligram equivalents, were standard risk mitigations. EPCS, electronic prescribing of controlled substances, via networks like SureScripts, could provide audit trails. The allegation: Tseng ignored the warning signs, continued to prescribe after overdoses and pharmacy alerts, and failed to monitor or taper appropriately. A jury concluded her conduct showed a conscious disregard for life, meeting the standard for second-degree murder under California law. There's a misconception that a murder conviction requires an explicit intent to kill. Second-degree murder can be about malice implied by extreme recklessness, like driving 120 miles per hour through a school zone. With opioids and benzodiazepines, the school zone is your patient's respiratory drive. If you're a prescriber and the evidence shows you turned that risk into routine, the law can and did call it murder. Let's talk about how a clinic should handle pain care safely, because it's not as simple as never prescribe opioids. Legitimate pain exists. Cancer patients, palliative care, severe injuries, these scenarios may require potent analgesics. But safe prescribing is a system, not a scribble. Baseline assessment, thorough history, physical exam, and diagnostics when indicated. Imaging isn't for everyone, but appropriate studies, MRI, EMG, can clarify chronic pain etiology. PDMP checks. Platforms like Cures, CA, F-Forces, FL, OurXE, NarxCare dashboards, now called Bamboo Health, visualize a patient's controlled substance history. Many EHRs, Epic, Cerner, Athena Health, NextGen, integrate PDMP queries directly into the workflow. Risk stratification. Tools like the Opioid Risk Tool, ORT, COMM, and NarxScores can contextualize risk. They're decision aids, not oracles. Monitoring. Random urine drug tests, pill counts, and follow-ups that focus on function, not just pain scores. Remote patient monitoring platforms and digital diaries, Apple Health, Google Fit, can track activity gains, sleep, and function, signals that therapy adds value. Dose discipline. Awareness of MME thresholds and CDC guidelines, 2016 and 2022 updates. For many non-cancer pain patients, the higher the dose, the higher the risk. Combinations. Extreme caution with benzodiazepines or sedatives. Co-prescribing nalcoxone is standard now, with intranasal options like Narcan widely available. Documentation, not an afterthought. Real documentation, not copy-paste, capturing the why behind every decision. Clinical decision support like UpToDate, Dynamed, or Elsevier Clinical Key belongs in that story. Where does AI fit? Today, health systems deploy analytics that flag outlier prescribers in near real time. Think of dashboards that would feel familiar to users of Power BI, Click, or Tableau, except these visualize MME per patient, benzo-opioid overlaps, early refill patterns, and geographic clusters. Some solutions embed predictive models.
If a physician's prescribing profile deviates sharply from peers by drug class, dose, or velocity, the system pings compliance teams. States run PDMP analytics at the population level. Insurers run theirs. Pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens run pattern detection. Even cloud-native services, AWS HealthLake, GCP's Healthcare API, and Azure's FHIR services make it easier to stitch data together while maintaining HIPAA-grade security. A note on fairness. High-volume prescribers aren't automatically villains. Oncologists and palliative care teams, for example, can legitimately prescribe large quantities. The question isn't volume alone, it's context, documentation, and patient outcomes. In Tseng's case, prosecutors convinced a jury that the context pointed to depraved indifference. The degree of overprescribing wasn't a misclick, it was a practice pattern. After the verdict, California medical boards and health systems leaned even harder on education, monitoring, and EHR alerts. The broader opioid ecosystem shifted too. Tamper-resistant formulations, REMS programs, nalcoxone distribution, and tighter pharmacy-level verification. Let's be explicit about the human cost. Each overdose victim is not a number. It's a person with a phone that still rings, messages that still sit unread, and families who had to learn the language of grief. Medications are tools, like defibrillators, stethoscopes, or ventilators. In the right hands, opioids can let a patient sleep without screaming. In the wrong hands, the same molecule is a silencer. Tseng is serving her 30 years to life sentence. Her case sent a chill through clinics that skate on the edge of safe practice. It also gave ethical physicians a language to push back. No, I won't write that. Here's why. Let's talk alternatives. Physical therapy, non-opioid analgesics like NSAIDs, SNRIs like duloxetine for neuropathic pain, topical lidocaine, interventional procedures where appropriate. Tools exist. The question is whether we're disciplined enough to use them.
Chapter 5. A Razor's Edge. Narendra Nagareddy. Some cases don't end with a life sentence, but still trace the same deadly perimeter. In Georgia, psychiatrist Narendra Nagareddy became the focus of a major investigation in 2016. Media nicknamed him Dr. Death after authorities tied a cluster of patient overdose deaths to prescriptions he wrote. He was arrested, accused of running what prosecutors characterized as a pill mill, though his clinic looked like a mental health practice, intake forms, progress notes, a waiting room with magazines. The allegations were about quantities, combinations, and a disregard for risk. Let's draw the map. Investigators from the DEA, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and local authorities executed search warrants. They cited a toll of patient deaths linked to controlled substances he prescribed, opioids and benzodiazepines, in combinations known to suppress respiration. They pursued murder charges, a rare step in prescriber cases and a sign of how serious they believed the pattern to be. Over the next few years, the case evolved. Ultimately, in 2019, Nagareddy pleaded guilty to a set of felony drug charges related to unlawful prescribing. As part of that resolution, the murder counts were not pursued to verdict. He received a significant prison sentence followed by probation, and his medical license was revoked. He did not receive a life sentence. Why include him in a video about doctors serving life for murder? Because the proximity matters. The line between medical negligence, overprescribing, and criminal homicide is narrow, and getting narrower as prosecutors gain experience and juries become more educated on the pharmacology. The difference between Tseng and Nagareddy, legally, is not that one wrote prescriptions and the other injected poison. Both were accused of creating pipelines to fatal outcomes. The difference is in what a jury heard, what a defendant admitted, and how prosecutors chose to resolve the case. From a systems perspective, Nagareddy's case highlights these lessons. PDMP utilization. Georgia's PDMP, like others, visualizes a patient's controlled substance history.
Modern PDMP tools, integrated with EHRs, can be set to hard stop certain co-prescriptions. When dashboards like NarxCare show high overdose risk, continued high-dose co-prescribing becomes legally dangerous territory. Workflow guardrails. E-prescribing platforms, Dr. First or SureScripts, capture who wrote what and when. Pharmacy platforms, Enterprise RX or Pioneer RX, flag early refills and dangerous combinations. Audits leave digital footprints. Team-based care. Psychiatry clinics often see patients with complex, comorbid conditions, anxiety, insomnia, chronic pain, substance use disorders. A safe clinic builds bridges to therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy via platforms like Talkspace, BetterHelp, non-sedating alternatives, SSRIs, SNRIs, buspirone, and sleep hygiene programs, Headspace, Calm, CBTI apps. Not every symptom needs a sedative. Telehealth and risk. Post-2020, telemedicine expanded rapidly. Platforms like Amwell, Teladoc, and Doxy.me made care flexible. But prescribing controlled substances via telehealth requires careful adherence to federal and state rules. AI-based identity verification, ERX audit trails, and appropriate in-person evaluations aren't red tape, they're guardrails. On the tech front, analytics are getting sharper. Health systems run sophisticated anomaly detection modeled after fraud prevention in banking. Think Splunk dashboards, SaaS analytics, Python pipelines on Databricks, and alerting through ServiceNow. Insurers deploy claims surveillance with ML to spot outliers. Pharmacies add real-time clinical decision support, while state PDMPs share data across borders to prevent doctor shopping from hopping county lines. None of that eliminates human judgment, it augments it. When the data says a provider's pattern is a statistical outlier, compliance teams pick up the phone, peer review engages, medical boards investigate, prosecutors enter only when evidence suggests the line from prescription to death is crossed with disregard that looks like malice. Remember, most psychiatrists are patient advocates, not pill dispensers. They balance meds like SSRIs, SNRIs, mood stabilizers like lithium or lamotrigine, and atypical antipsychotics like aripiprazole or quetiapine with therapy, lifestyle tools like sleep trackers like Oura Ring or Garmin, and community support. In safe hands, the goal is function and stability, not a quick sedation. Nagareddy's outcome, prison, probation, loss of license, shows that even short of a murder conviction, the criminal justice system can end a dangerous practice. It also sends a message. When multiple patients die, the courtroom lights switch on.
Now, let's not pretend tech is magic. These stories aren't about a single missing gadget. They're about culture. It takes humility for a doctor to say, "I could be wrong, let's check the PDMP again." It takes courage for a nurse to file a report. It takes curiosity for a pharmacist to call the prescriber and ask, "Why 240 mme with a benzo for this patient?" It takes steady leadership to back staff when they raise alarms. And it takes informed patience. If you're watching this, consider adding a few tools to your own health life. Keep your records organized using apps like Apple Health, Google Health, or a patient portal. Ask questions about medications. Names like oxycodone, hydromorphone, and alprazolam carry risks. If they're prescribed together, ask why and what the rescue plan is. If you struggle with sleep or anxiety, know there are non-pharmacologic options, CBTI apps, Sleepio, mindfulness, Headspace or Balance, and therapy platforms, Talkspace or BetterHelp. Benzos can help short-term, but they can also hook you. If you or a loved one takes opioids, ask about naloxone. Over-the-counter Narcan nasal spray is simple to use. CVS, Walgreens, and many local pharmacies carry it. For second opinions, services like ZocDoc can help you find specialists. Telehealth from Teladoc or Amwell can be a bridge, but complex issues still deserve in-person care. Let's also acknowledge the obvious. The overwhelming majority of physicians, nurses, PAs, NPs, and pharmacists are exactly what you hope for: competent, compassionate, and exhausted from doing their best. They use EHR checklists, clean their scopes with the right enzymatic detergents, verify allergies, and adjust doses by kidney function using calculators like MD-Cal. They study at night, scroll through PubMed, and learn from mistakes. They don't belong in the same sentence as murderers. But we tell these stories because transparency is preventive care for systems. Swango pushed hospitals to tighten credentialing. Gosnell pushed regulators to fix inspection gaps. MacDonald reminds us that forensics evolve, but court judgments anchor on what's provable. Tseng reshaped how prosecutors think about prescribing. Nagarreddy shows that even short of a murder conviction, the law can shut down dangerous practices. If a tool can heal, it can harm. That's true for a scalpel, a syringe, a sedative, and a database query. The difference is the hands that wield it and the eyes that watch them. In this video, we saw 5 stories. A poisoner whose patients never saw the danger coming. A clinic where neglect was visible in every corner. A family tragedy measured in blood types and broken timelines. A prescriber whose signature became a lethal dose. And a psychiatrist whose charts told a story prosecutors couldn't ignore. 2 are serving life without parole. 1 serves multiple life sentences. 1 serves 30 to life. 1 served hard time after a plea, his license gone. Each case is a data point on a graph we should all want to flatten to 0. If you're still here, you're part of a rare group, the people who don't look away. Do one more thing for me. Scrub in for the next case. Subscribe. One last thought before we close. You can walk into a clinic and see only the white coat, or you can train your eye, like a radiologist reading a film, to notice the things that shouldn't be there. An unopened crash cart is fine. An empty oxygen tank is not. A doctor who welcomes questions is normal. A doctor who gets angry when you ask is not. A prescription with a plan is medicine. A prescription without one is a hazard. Medicine is a trust contract. Trust, but verify. Ask questions. Use the tools. Keep the receipts. And when something feels wrong, say something. Thank you for watching.